I think the way Israel conducts itself today, and hopefully I don't know, hopefully will continue, but the way it is today is that, like I said earlier, for an Israeli Jew, it's a democracy. Israeli Jews can say everything they want to say and come and go as they please. It's a democracy as long as you're an Israeli Jew. You know, I have the VIP card. This is the way it's been so far, and I think it behooves the state of Israel to continue this, because then they can present themselves as a democracy, and they can say, "See, we have people who say these things, and we allow them to do so." So I don't have a sense that I need to be afraid for my safety, and I don't think Israel would want to change that. My sister is also very active. She just wrote a book about the Israeli school books, describing and demonstrating that the Israeli education system is a racist education system. She's an educator. And she's a tenured professor at the Hebrew University. Nobody's doing anything. So this is the reality. The reality is that there is a clear difference between what it's like to be an Israeli Jew when you're in Israel and what it's like when you're something else, what they like to call non-Jew, because they distinguish Jews from non-Jews, similar to what other racist regimes used to do to Jews, by the way. I feel fine, but thank you for your concern. In regards to the settlers do present an impediment. There's no question. Not only do they present an impediment, they are the impediment. I mean, they were sent. It's not only that Bibi Netanyahu's government is a settler government. Every single government has been a settler government, because they always send the settlers forward to create facts on the ground, and then, of course, the Israeli military shows up, and there's a city or there's a town. What's interesting about that is you'll have this happening now in the West Bank particularly. You'll have a Palestinian town with no running water, no electricity. Why? Because it's too far away from the center of this country. So there's no electricity, and there's no running water, and there's no roads, because it's way out there. One day settlers show up with a caravan, and within 24 hours they have a road, running water, and electricity, and it's just 100 meters away from the same Palestinian town who hasn't had water. And so this is the reality. I don't think that the settlers are going to have to be convinced. I think the settlers, and to be honest, all Israelis are settlers. All of Israel is occupied Palestine, and every single Israeli city is a settlement, an illegal settlement. So in that regard, they're all the same, and I don't think they're going to be convinced. I don't think the whites in South Africa were convinced that apartheid is bad before apartheid fell. Apartheid fell because it was wrong, and they had to deal with it. And I think Israelis are going to have to deal with it one day when it's over, and they're going to have to realize that there's a new reality. They do have a propensity for violence. Some of them are very dangerous, and I think some of them will end up in caves like the Taliban. And there will be, some police force or army force chasing them in caves in the Judean desert. But I think that's a minority. I don't think that's the main cause, and I wouldn't. And as much as an obstacle as they would like to present, and they are very violent. I think it's one of the hurdles, one of the issues, one of the many issues that the Israelis and Palestinians are going to have to face together, including things like the right of return, things like how you compensate refugees. I mean, there are a lot of issues, very difficult issues that the two parties will have to work together once they create this new state, or once they create this new political reality. And none of them are easy. None of them are simple. So this is one of them. And then in regards to AIPAC, it's interesting. The power of AIPAC is very strong in the United States, and I understand that the power of the Israeli lobby here in Canada is very strong as well. The reality in the United States is that if you want a career in politics, you have to support Israel. It's just the cost of doing business. It's the way it is. And most politicians don't care enough, so they'll support Israel and then do whatever it is that they want to do with their career, including the president. If the president wanted to deal with this issue, he would have to put everything else on hold, and I don't think he feels it's worth it. Now, the AIPAC that we know today is really the descendant, if you will, of the early Zionists that were here in the United States before the State of Israel was even created, selling this notion that these Jews have a right to go conquer Palestine and colonize it. And so they've had a lot of experience. They're very good at what they do. Very, very good at what they do. In fact, they're very strong all over the Western world. The U.S., Canada, Britain, France, Germany, certainly. They're very, very strong. And that's the reality. Supporting Israel is the cost of doing business if you're a politician. However, I don't expect change will come because of an American president. I don't think change will come as a result of an Israeli prime minister either. Change is going to come as a result of a shift in public opinion that's already taken place, as a result of pressure and resistance that I described earlier, and it's all going to be grassroots. You know, Hosni Mubarak wasn't thrown out of office because America suddenly realized he was a corrupt, brutal dictator and it was time to get rid of him. Right? America liked that, actually. America and Israel tried to keep him in power as long as they could. You know, he was thrown out of office because his people had enough of him. And this is, I think, similar to what's going to take place in Israel-Palestine, even with AIPAC and all its power, and even with all the money that Israel gets from the United States. Again, Egypt is a good example. South Vietnam, some of you may recall, there was a country called South Vietnam years ago, and American presidents, all the way to Gerald Ford, swore that they would never forsake their ally in Southeast Asia. They would never forsake, and they were promising money and they were promising arms. There's no more South Vietnam. And so I think there are examples of countries and situations where they had all the support and all the arms, and it seemed like they were invincible, and they're part of history today. We can take 3 more.
Can we just take a moment?
I think on the issue of the Zionist Jews and the Zionist non-Jews, I think if we look at it historically, if you read novels by Bashevis Zinger and Shai Agnon and these early Hebrew and Jewish writers, they portray a reality where most good Jewish families looked at the Zionists and at the socialists as riffraff. And their biggest concern was that their kids might end up in one of those 2 camps, because good Jewish people need to either study the Torah or go into trade, or go into the shop. But the Zionists were considered riffraff, troublemakers, and this was traditionally the way most Jews viewed Zionism. And after the creation of the State of Israel, Jews didn't come. Even after this was 2 years after the Holocaust, 3 years after the Holocaust, most survivors didn't choose Israel. They chose either to go back to Europe, go back to Germany even, or come to North America. Why replace one racist state with another? And this happened either because of ideology, because they were non-Zionists and they realized Zionism was racist and crazy, or because they didn't care and they wanted a good life. And if you want a good life, you go where there's promise of equality for everybody. And so that, I think, if you look at it historically, that was the reality. Now today, jumping forward to today, you have what's called the Jewish community. And the Jewish community are the Jewish Zionist communities. These are these big synagogues, big temples, and many Jews don't find a place in those communities because they are completely bought into Zionism. And the Israeli flag is everywhere, and the AIPAC fundraisers are there all the time, the Jewish Federation, and many Jews don't find themselves in this reality, either because they don't care enough, or because they're secular, or because they can't stand it. Now, the impression today is that the Zionists, these Jewish communities, are the Jewish community. And they won't discuss if you're not a Zionist. They look at you like you're crazy, or you're a traitor, or whatever the case may be. And that's just the way it is. And whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish, it doesn't matter. If you don't support Israel, they won't talk to you. But what I'm arguing is that they do not represent the real Jewish community. They are certain communities that did buy into Zionism, and they do have the bigger temples, the bigger synagogues, the bigger PR systems that work for them, and so on and so forth. But they don't represent all Jews. I think more. I would, and I see this only. I began to realize this as I would come to lectures like this that I've been doing for the last 2 years. Since word of my book has come out, I've been doing this even before the book came out. And I see many Jewish people come to the lectures, and many Jewish people support and say what I've been saying even before I was saying it. And again, either because ideologically they didn't agree with it, or because they didn't care, whatever the case may be, but they realize that Israel is a monstrosity that does not represent them. And I'll say this again, Israel does not represent Jewish people. There's nothing Jewish about Zionism. Zionism is as far from being Jewish as you could possibly get. if you turn in terms of values and so on and so forth. And so when I say that there's a large Jewish community out there that is not Zionist, I'm talking about these people who are not part of these noisy, big synagogues that look like I don't know what, and are out there, fighting the fight for Zionist Israel and support Israel right or wrong. So that's what I'm talking about, just to make it clear. And I know for a fact that there have been Jewish communities who are anti-Zionist, who maintained their identity, who spoke Yiddish and so on and so forth, long before I even realized this was possible. And these are the people that I'm talking about. And I know it's a tough place to be, especially if you have friends that are in those Zionist communities, and then there's a problem. Okay, what you present is a very good point. My older son, just is a freshman at UCLA, and as soon as I don't know what kind of censors they have out there, but somebody somehow realized right away that he was Jewish, and boom, he was invited to like I think it's called JuicyLA. JuicyLA is like that's what I said. And JuicyLA, to like their Facebook page and come to their Shabbos parties. He's never done a Shabbos party in his life. And by the way, sign this petition that was going around the UC system that wanted to ban the pro-Palestinian groups on campus at UC campuses. By the way, and he got into this conversation with this girl on Facebook saying, what's your problem? What are you talking about? You guys are offended because there are pro-Palestinian events on campus? Go live in Gaza for a month and let's see how inconvenient that is. How convenient that is. People want to protest, they can protest. People want to be pro-Palestinian, they can be pro-Palestinian. And she brought up this whole thing of saying pretty much what you said, as growing up as Jewish here in America, I felt that Israel was part of my identity, and identifying with Israel is part of what it means to be Jewish, and so on and so forth. Which is very true. Zionism kind of became a secular religion for Jews in America. It's this connection to Israel as your identity. Why? You weren't born there. Your parents weren't born there. Your grandparents weren't born there. Nobody you can trace, even as far back as you can trace your family, you won't find anybody who ever lived there. Why are you somehow connected to this country? What have you got to say about talking about this country? And I had a conversation with a rabbi in Chicago, Brent Rosen, who has gone through this transformation of realizing this is true. And he and I were on a panel talking about this issue. And I said, he's an American Jew. He certainly has nothing to say about Palestine. I'm one of colonizers. I have no right to talk about Palestine. Where's the Palestinian? Why is there no Palestinian here to talk about this issue? The only people who have a right to Palestine, the only people who have a claim to Palestine are Palestinians. Now today you have a population of the children of the descendants of immigrants like myself. This is the only home they know, so they become natives of Palestine, so to speak, by default because they were born there. But American Jews or Jews anywhere else in the world have a right to talk about this place. They have a birthright. How did this absurd notion? I always wonder, how are they able to sell this? But they did create a reality where young Jews feel, kind of like you expressed, that this is part of my identity.
But then we sit and we listen to someone like you, and we have our eyes opened to what it's really like, and we wonder how can we be Jewish and have some place called the Jewish state that so ill represents us.
Good point. You can't. Because there is no Jew. You can't. But the thing is, the reality is you wake up from a dream and you realize it's not true. You realize that this reality that these things that you were taught and you were fed are not true. I went through a very similar process. Being, the creation of the State of Israel, the story of the War of Independence is part of Israeli identity. And for me it was even more so because my father was an officer and a general, and this was part of who I am. And suddenly somebody's telling me, or I'm realizing, that this was not an act of heroism, it was an act of terrorism. 12 months of terrorizing a civilian population. And my father was an officer, participated in that, and I thought he was a hero. And all of his friends. That's a big burden that you have to carry, and then you have to realize, you have to figure out how you work with this. And I think if you want to find your Jewishness, there's lots of ways to do that. You can read what Bashevis Zinger Read some of the older Jewish writers, what they thought about the period when this was happening. Why were they anti-Zionist? What did Einstein talk? How did Einstein refer to Israel, and so forth? And find your Jewishness inside you. Being Jewish, I mean, could be many, many things. But certainly, if you look at traditions of Jews in the West, they always represent humanity. They always represent equal human rights. They always represent the fight for the cause of the weak, and so on and so forth. Conquering a land and occupying it has never been a part of Judaism. For thousands of years, Jews lived in exile, and they were fine. Iraqi Jews were proud to be Iraqis. Iraqi Jews in Israel, the Jewish immigrants who ended up in Israel, when the U.S. was bombing Baghdad, they were crying because their city was being destroyed. And they hadn't been there in 40 years. Iraqi Jews were Iraqis, and Yemenite Jews were Yemenites, and Syrian Jews were Syrians. To this day, their descendants in Israel call themselves Syrians or Algerians or Moroccans. To this day. Their grandchildren are calling themselves, and they know that they're Moroccans, or they know that they're Syrians, or they know that they're Iraqis, or Kurds, or whatever the case may be. You're a Jewish Canadian, or you're Jewish American, or you're Polish, or whatever the case may be. This is who you are. And being Jewish is part of your identity. But Israel is a myth. This Jewish state, this Jewish homeland is a myth. It's not true. Now, the reality today is that there are Israelis there. Like I said earlier, we're the children of colonizers and occupiers, and we're there. So that is the issue. It's between Israelis and Palestinians. But I think it's important for people to realize that other Jews have no claim to say anything. If they want to, they don't have a stake there, even though they were told that they do. And there are a lot of ways to claim or reclaim your Jewish identity. And this is something that I had to go through, like I said myself. What does that mean about me? So what does it mean to be an Israeli suddenly? I'm an Israeli. There's nothing I can do about it. I speak Hebrew. I think like an Israeli. That's where the place I call home. Even though I haven't lived there in many years, that's where I want to visit. That's where I see my family. But it's in the context of realizing that Israel is not really Israel is a part of that reality. There's Palestine, and there are Palestinian people, and they have rights, and we need to take that into consideration. And we're Palestinians, so that there is a future for both Israelis and Palestinians together. And that is the context. In Students for Justice in Palestine groups on campuses, at least half the kids that I see are Jewish kids. Jewish American kids who walk hand in hand and support the Palestinian struggle. In the BDS movement, you see a lot of Israelis, a lot of Jews. In the protests in the West Bank, you see a lot of Jews, a lot of Israelis. So there is a role for Jews, and there is a role for you and other young Jews within this context of Israel, but just on a different side of the conflict, so to speak. Does that make sense? And I would say that if you want to reclaim your Jewishness, and you do have a sense, and you do have strong feeling for that country and for that place, this is the way to go.
Feeling is wanting to separate the Jewishness, the Jew part of Jewish state of Israel. It's the state of Israel. I have nothing to do with it.
True. That's right. That's right. And this is a good way to do it. If you care to be engaged, and you're here tonight, obviously it's important enough for you to come and listen. And so thanks for that comment. I think it's an extremely important point. Okay, how will the right of return and the settlements be dealt with? Like I said earlier, it's the same thing as the issue of the settlers. Once getting to a point where there's equality, getting to a point where Israelis and Palestinians vote together in a one state, is the first step. Now they're going to have to decide on countless very, very difficult issues. The right of return. How can anybody claim that the Palestinians do not have the right to return? I mean, how can anybody possibly claim that people are still alive? And there were people last night in Vancouver that I spoke to who were the generation that were kicked out, don't have a right to return to their homes. Now, in many cases, the homes are still standing. There are entire cities that have become resorts, so they're all hotels and restaurants. The homes are still there. In Jerusalem, many of the homes are empty. They're just standing there. In many cases, Israeli families live there, and they've been living there for 60 years. How do you implement the right to return? How do you recognize who has the right to return? How do you compensate them? These are issues that are going to have to be dealt with by Israelis and Palestinians, and they're going to have to sit together. I think a lot of lawyers have to be involved in recognizing and understanding how you do this. Maybe you give them tax breaks and free education for 3 generations. I don't know. But the problems are huge. And then you have the issue of settlements. You have these big cities that were built for Israelis only on Palestinian land. So how do you deal with that as well? You're going to have, and I've met with a lot of groups of young lawyers. Some are Palestinian, some are Jewish, some are mixed. Actually talking about this. They're getting together and they're trying to figure out how. And I think their role is going to be crucial. It's going to be, in the end, it's about the law. It's going to be about putting together a constitution. It's going to be the citizen and what are their rights. Compensate for 65 years, of this reality, of this. I'll give you one example. Foreign laborers that they import. Eastern Europe and Asia. And manual labor, and they send their money home. Palestinians who could do that work. Israel has a shortage of doctors. Who would be happy to go to work, or the West Bank, or a place that Palestinians live. Of having a large, if they choose to, and those that don't choose to, well, they'll have to figure this out. But I think the state where there is equality, where we recognize no longer this Jewish state, is then they're going to have to work together to figure out time. There's no question about that. Okay, you want to do another round? Yeah. Okay. Well, India has got who knows how many languages and how many different ethnic groups, yet from the north to the south, to the east to the west, every single person will tell you they're Indian. And whether all their wonderful ancient kings, Ashoka and Akbar, one was a Buddhist, one was a Muslim, one was something else, they identify them as part of their history. Even though they speak a different language, they practice a different religion, and they look differently. And I think that's one good sample. How do you create that sense of identity? On the one hand, that you as who you are within your own national identity, and then create a larger identity with the state. So I think that's one of those things that will have to be resolved within that framework. It's going to be the homeland of Israelis, and it's going to be the homeland of Palestinians. There's no question. Palestinians are going to want their own symbols, and Israelis are going to want their own symbols, and they're going to have to figure this out. And I don't think there's a way. I don't think necessarily I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I think they're going to have to figure out a way to make it work, because this is the reality today. The reality today is, like I said, you have about 6 million Palestinians, or close to 6 million Palestinians. You've got 6.5 million Israelis. You've got another 5 million Palestinians living in exile. The birth rate among Palestinians is greater than among Israelis, so you're going to have more Palestinians than Israelis pretty soon. All of these things are going to have to be addressed by Israelis and Palestinians together and resolved. And these are all very big and very difficult issues. At the same time, I don't think they're insurmountable. Let's see. Well, what is happening in Israel to make Israelis aware of the Nakba and so forth? In a bizarre way, there's a law against talking about the Nakba in Israel. In other words, government institutions, schools, and so forth, who talk about the Nakba, the government will not fund them, will rescind their funding. So there's a law that's called the Nakba law, and in a very bizarre way, that is what's making Israelis aware of the Nakba. Because if you're not supposed to talk about it, that means it must be an interesting issue. So in a very bizarre way, they're doing it in a reverse. But the truth is that if you talk to Israelis, they will go back to 1947 and see, it's all because the Palestinians did not accept the resolution of partition. And these young Israelis out of high school will say this. This is the argument. So, in all seriousness, not much is being done at all. Quite the opposite. Israeli discourse has become more racist. I don't know if you took a look at the results of the last Israeli elections. What used to be extreme, insane right is now center. It's center. Sometimes it's even center left. Because the entire political discourse, the entire political reality has been divorced from the Palestinian issue. So if you make racist remarks against Palestinians, if you support the bombing of Gaza, that's mainstream. That's fine. If you support the fact that there are thousands of political prisoners in Israeli jails, That's fine. That's what it means to be a good Israeli. If you're against these things, you're anti-Zionist, you're in the fringe. So Israel is going very rapidly in the other direction. And the education secretary, the minister of education in Israel is as far right-wing, loony as you could possibly, well, I don't know who's going to be the next one, but the one of the outgoing government.